not my favorite thing to have my picture taken, but I guess it's the way it goes. So anyway, Kalama was as we talked about before, the county seat. And there were 3 hangings in Cowlitz County, and so all 3 were in Kalama. And if you have a minute to take a look, there's a picture of one of the hangings, and it was behind what was the courthouse, and the courthouse was before the community building. So it was in that same spot, and you can tell it's behind the building, and you can see the trap where they dropped them. The people are there with their suits on, but there's no crowd there. But anyway, there were 3, and my mom, who knew every single grave in that graveyard, I swear, didn't know where the hanging guy was buried, but she knew it was there. So I think only one was buried in Kalama. One thing that I didn't tell you, it's important to the women, when we were Washington Territory, women had the vote. We were, became a state, we lost it. But surprise, surprise. 2 years later, we finally got it back. So Washington's always been pretty progressive. So, let's see. I'm trying to think of, there are a lot of other stories about Kalama. Is there something that somebody is particularly interested in knowing about? This is not as dragged down as it might have been. Yes.
About the car and the gas and when you were in school.
Oh yeah, I got to go to, I'm not an athlete. I don't know where the hell the ball is or somewhere. But we had one chance to have a baseball team, the girls. And I think we were going to Ridgefield. And you had to get there, and because we had a farm and a truck, and my dad was a cop and he had a car, we had a little bit of gas. So there was, how are we going to get there? Oh, my dad will take us. So I got to be on the baseball team. I don't think they really wanted me. They wanted my dad's car. and it was, we went, I don't know, I probably didn't do any good because I was never very good at that stuff. Like when I was a cheerleader in 1945 and 6, if you can imagine that far. I talked to a little girl at one of the games, and she said, well, could you jump up like that? And I said, no, I couldn't jump up like that when I was young, and I still can't, but I was loud. So that was my talent as a cheerleader. I was loud. Let's see. What did you ask me about? Oh, the gas thing I told you that. Okay. Yes?
Joanna, you talked a little bit about the Chinese in Kalama. Could you talk a little bit about American Indians here and how the demographics of the town as you were growing up?
Well, I don't know a lot more than what I've told you, except that, you know, it was that the town where the main street is was not where it was in other years, and other pictures that I've seen are things that Mom talked about. But the Chinese came to town to help with the Mountain Timber Company railroads to bring the logs into town. So apparently they did their job and moved on, and there were some buried in our cemetery, and we have put a marker up there in memory of them. But I don't know very much about it, and Mom didn't either. But that's.
And what about the American Indians?
Well, I never heard anything about any of the Indians, except that there was a tribe that around here. But Indians in this part of the country were friendly. I mean, there were no hostilities of any sort. And when Laluska came to town, that was he carved that totem pole down there, and it gets a lot of play nowadays, but it didn't get a lot of play when it was happening. If some of you can remember that time. My mother was very prejudiced. She thought it was a bunch of baloney, so what do you know? That's how I grew up with that kind of thing. But of course, he's still around. And one year, I don't know if any of you know Brenda McKinney, Clift McKinney. When she was in high school, she was a cheerleader, and she had Laluska helped them to make little leather skirts and vests, I think, if I remember. And Melissa has those now up at the school. The school has a pretty good collection of all of the school history, which goes back a long ways. So, and she's continually collecting stuff like that. So, see if I've got anything else down here that I haven't remembered. I have to make these notes because I forget. Oh, I think one of the things that's really important, Carolyn Reynoldson's grandfather was responsible for the telephone and for the electricity in Kalama. And there was what do you want to call it, place up the Kalama River where the water came through and it was directed, and that's how the water, the power got to town.
He was actually the maintenance man of that equipment.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing that was really important to Kalama, after the Depression, all of you think the NRA is the National Rifle Association, but it's really the National Recovery Act. And that was Roosevelt. And that was what meant a lot to all of us growing up, because that was where people got their jobs. And they built the school, the brick school, the community building, and what is now the library. And the library was designed by Mr. Rosenblum, I think it was, and his wife worked at the school for many years as the secretary to the school. So, one of the other stories that's starting to recirculate, it must be an anniversary, is the D.B. Cooper story. Do you know the D.B. Cooper story about the guy who stole all that money and supposed to parachute it out of an airplane at some ridiculous height? Well, Mr. Mers and Mr. Boatman, decided that what they needed to do was go up in the woods and spread out a lot of white sheets and white paper so that when they flew over looking for the parachute, they'd find it. So they went to all that trouble, and it snowed. So we've got a lot of Kalama stories like that.
You have a story about the Sputnik? Oh, is it?
About what?
Sputnik? That was
Oh,
one of
the
Don's-
Sputnik story?
That's one of Don's.
Yeah, that was Don Mers. Some of you might remember your grandmothers. There was a little, we had a little metal globe that was about this big around, and it had a spike on each end of it, and it was on a little thing and you could twirl it around. That was probably when I was in grade school, I don't know. But anyway, Don found one of those, and he put a blanket over it, didn't he, Bill? And he brought it up and went to tavern and told him that he found the Sputnik. Now the Sputnik, if you don't remember, was a Russian first space craft, and it was supposed to have these spikes on it. So he brings this into town and tells everybody he found a Sputnik. Well, of course, you know, what are you going to believe about Don Mers? But anyway, the FBI believed it and came down and investigated it. So like I said, there are lots of Kalama stories, but
Looking for airplanes during
my job during the Second World War was we had to watch for every single airplane that went over. There was bombs in Southern Oregon and in Alaska, of course. So we watched for every plane, and we called a center place, which was in Seattle, and reported this plane, how big it was, how many engines it had on it, and which way it was going. So I was 14, and so I got the 4 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning shift. And I lived up well, almost where I do now. And this watchtower was down as you go out of town on and almost to where you turn off to go to Cloverdale off of the main road going up the hill. And then there was a tower up there, and that's where we went. So I walked from up there to down there and be there at 4 o'clock in the morning, because how else are you going to get anywhere? So that was my job. So I put in a lot of hours doing that, but kids were to be seen and not heard. So if you weren't as young as me, you didn't get any credit. But I got a couple of benefits from that. I think it was because of that I got invited down to on a Russian ship. We had Lend-Lease during the war here too, and it seems to me that they took some kind of motors or something to Russia, and I think some grain or something like that. Anyway, I went down to this thing, and you know that saying, what's put on your plate, you eat it, whether you like it or not. Well, they put this pasty stuff on my plate, and I'm trying to eat it, because you don't leave, if you go someplace, you're polite, you eat what's there. And these bugs are crawling up the wall. And so I'm sure they were cockroaches, but I didn't know a cockroach from anything else, but I remember that. And then those guys did a Russian dance where they were down on their knees and kicked their feet. It was really interesting, and I'm sure that I got invited down there because some of the people from the Watchtower did, and I was there, so I got to go along. So, same thing, Dick remembers the Chicken Coop Inn, and he told me what I thought where it was, and Bill was wrong for the first time. How about that? And I was right. But anyway, I got invited out there once because I was much too young for the crowd, but they put up with me. It was a group quite a bit older than, and maybe probably Don Murr's age group or something like that. But anyway, that was the perks that I got for getting up and walking down there at 4 o'clock in the morning. The interesting thing about that, when I later served on the board of nursing, that was after I was retired, so I was in the late 90s. I served with a lady from Seattle who had been answering the phone down there in Seattle and got our phone calls. So it was, she was a Chinese lady, and it was really interesting for me to meet somebody that on the other end of that phone when we were doing that. But, and there's a lot of stories about the Watchtower. I'll give you one more, and then if you're tired of this, we can stop. But there was a family that lived down below that, and they lived kind of in a shack there, and they didn't get along very well. They fought about everything. And he got mad at her for something that she did that he didn't like, and he took her shoe and went out and put on the chopping block, cut the toe off. And so she had babies, of course, and she's got the baby in the stroller, not the stroller, the buggy, probably a wicker buggy, and she's pushing that baby up and down the street with her shoe flopping, her toes flopping because he cut the end of her shoe up. Well, they had a couple other good fights, and the ladies in the tower watched this, but they didn't happen at 4 o'clock in the morning, so I didn't get to see any of it. But Dad talked about them. Anyway, they got in a fight, and he was giving her a really bad time. So she got in the house and got the door shut, and she locked the door, and he couldn't get in. So he went around the house, and he found a window, and he tried to climb in to get her. So she took the board and went around and got him on the backside, his half out the window. So I didn't get to see those things, but they happened. So living in a small town is really fun. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Anything else that anybody can think they want to know about? Well, we've got somebody here. Well, Brian, let's talk about the Leroys. The Leroys have always been kind of the center of Kalama's athletics things, and they were fishermen, so Brian can tell you some about that.